Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Bill. All right, so part of the problem of following a New Yorker, especially from a kid from Alabama, is my pace and my tempo is just a tad bit slower. So if you guys have gotten used to the New York tempo, just kind of bear with me. I did go to school in New York, so I've kind of increased it a little bit, but not quite the same. Also later on, Demi Janot will join me on the podium to do a demo of the application. Unfortunately, when you hear business, most of the people just kind of bailed on us. I see it kind of, the crowd thin. Maybe it was just me that they didn't want to hear, but we'll move on very quickly. Also, Art Schuzel is our customer over at FDA, so if there's any tough questions, save them for Art later on and just kind of take them here. But either way, let me move on. All right, sorry. So as just a quick agenda, we're gonna, all right, I'll do that. All right, thank you. Just so as a quick agenda, we'll spend a little time talking about Armedia because we got to do some shameless marketing. Then we'll introduce our customer, again, CDRH, Center for Devices and Radiological Health. We'll look at the business from a business governance perspective, and then some of the business objectives, and then an interesting question of why Alfresco. So why did they go down the path of selecting Alfresco? And then why the Armedia Alfresco team from a delivery perspective and the advantages of there. Demi will come in and talk about phase 1 of the project, and then a demo of the application, and then we'll open it up for questions. So it's about 30 minutes, so we're going to try to keep the tempo moving fairly quickly. But if there's something that you guys want us to pause and ask a question doing it, feel free to stop us. All right, so who is Armedia? Armedia has been in business now for a little over 10 years, specializing in enterprise content management. We pride ourselves in being vendor agnostic, although we've been doing quite a bit of work in the Alfresco, as the government has really adopted open source. Alfresco as a platform is probably one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing segment of the Alfresco customer base. And the good news about that is 90% of our revenue comes from doing work in the federal government, so we've been the benefactors of that partnership to a large extent. We've also developed some frameworks and solutions around the enterprise content management space. One is our Caliente tool, which is a bulk migration tool that will help you if you're looking at doing some kind of ECM consolidation or migration. OPM is one of our customers where we're migrating from an Oracle IPM, about 40 terabytes of data, into an Alfresco environment. I see our OPM table over here. And then we're also doing some work over at VA and a couple other places. ACM is a case management framework that we demoed last year at Content.gov, but coming out of doing about 6 years of work over at the FBI, ultimately you think about a case, it's a file cabinet with folders and documents, and there's workflow around it, there's security around it. You think about an enterprise content management platform, you got an electronic representation of that, right? You got a cabinet with folders and documents, and you got business policies and functional access control and data access control. So it's a great platform to leverage to build a case management system on. Kind of moving on quickly, we've done quite a bit of work in the government and commercial space. We have an office in Atlanta that's mainly focused on the commercial space outside of CDC. We are CMMI level 3, which basically means that we have standardized documented processes, both for program management as well as for software development. And for your socioeconomic kind of check boxes, we are 8A and veteran owned. This is just a list of some of our clients that we work with, but more importantly, here's some of the customers that we work with doing Alfresco work in the federal government. So again, we've done quite a bit of Alfresco in the last few years across the government, and as I mentioned, it's one of the fastest growing segments of the Alfresco platform. We've done quite a bit. So who is FDA CDRH, or the Center for Devices and Radiological Health? FDA CDRH specifically is responsible for ensuring the safety and effectiveness of medical devices and eliminating unnecessary human exposure to man-made radiation and from medical, occupational, and consumer products. Man, that's a lot. Wow. All right. So from a business governance, The MDUFA, a Medical Device User Fee Amendment of 2012, basically set up and said that industry or medical device companies would pay a fee to FDA in order to ensure that their devices were safe for human consumption, or human use, rather, right? And so in exchange for paying a fee, what FDA, from a collaborative perspective, said is, we'll give you visibility into the process, we'll work more efficiently with you in industry, and then we'll provide better reporting and collaboration on the process of evaluating the devices. So when we think about somewhat open government, but at least a more transparent and a more collaborative and participant government, I think this kind of fits into that field of an industry kind of working with government and being able to kind of collaborate on some of those things. And more importantly, I think if you look at the last slide, roughly over a 5-year period, it's estimated over roughly $600 million of fees are being collected by the federal government from industry, right? That's definitely a good news as we think about our budget concerns, right? And then some of the business objectives. Real-time status of information from submissions, right? So industry want to know, where is my device in the process of being evaluated? They wanted to be able to store everything electronically. Not all submissions are coming in electronically. Some are coming in from a paper base. So how do you scan those things, get them into a repository, and then the communications that are going back and forth between the medical device company as well as the evaluators that are reviewing the device to make sure that it is safe for human use. They wanted to implement digital signatures, kind of move away from the electronic signature process, and an interactive review process. I think that's probably one of the bigger things, and that Demi will actually show our initial implementation of that interactive process. And then the big thing, they want to be able to capture, store, and report on how are we doing from a MDUFA 3 perspective. How interactive is FDA with industry? Are they kind of meeting the law, right? Or at least the intent of the law. Kind of moving on. So why Alfresco, right? Which hopefully some of you guys are thinking through this. Why move down the path of selecting Alfresco? I think reputation, open platform, the economics is always there, and then the proof of concept that went down. So let me kind of expand on these. So when you think about reputation, Alfresco, when you look at Gartner, Forrester, for the most part, they're a thought leader in the ECM space, and they're continuing to kind of move out over the last few years. So Alfresco has built a great reputation for itself in the ECM space. I think also, not only just in the ECM space, when you think about in the government space. I showed a slide not too long ago just showing you how Alfresco had advanced just from an Armedia perspective and the work that we've done. Of course, there are other partners, and they're doing much more than the work with Armedia in the federal space. So what you're seeing is Alfresco is gaining reputation also in the government space. Open platform. From an FDA perspective, they didn't want to just be limited to the UI. So accessing the content through share. Some customers actually wanted to go through WebDAV. They're used to their Windows Explorer look. And then other customers, they had custom applications, and ultimately they just wanted to expose that information through either the web services or, in some cases, using the CMIS API, right? Using a standard open API, for some reason in the future, if they decided to move to a different repository, they could do that. Economics. When you think about Alfresco, especially as you start scaling out the repository, from a price point perspective, it's just very, very attractive, right? And then the proof of concept. At FDA, they already have SharePoint, they already have Documentum, right, as platform. So why introduce Alfresco into the mix? And so as they kind of thought through their requirements, mainly around being an open platform and being able to share their information, also they looked at, as we kind of grow this out over a multi-phase approach, what's the economics of it? Alfresco kind of made its way into the evaluation process. And so then they went through a package evaluation and ultimately down-selected Alfresco to actually go through a proof of concept to evaluate it against the use cases. And coming out of the proof of concept, they really felt comfortable that this was the platform that they wanted to actually leverage as their ECM platform to solve the problem. So why Armedia plus the Alfresco team? So from a delivery perspective, it's not only just Armedia delivering, but also Alfresco consultants were a part of the team. So why that team? I think one, initially everybody want to think about how do you increase the probability of being successful, right? I mean, I think every project you go into, no one goes in saying, I want to decrease my probability of being successful. So to increase that, one is let's bring in a partner that really understands the platform, right? Sometimes it's hard enough just kind of understanding the problem, right? And so, because we all speak different language. We come in speaking the ECM language. Okay, well, let's talk about your metadata. Let's talk about your taxonomy. I'm like, what? And they're talking about their business process. And so, one, we have to deal with understanding that language, yet alone if you're trying to figure out how to even do this stuff within the platform. So they wanted a proven partner that know the Alfresco platform. The other one is they wanted a partner that understands federal, how to do business in the federal space. I mentioned earlier, we're roughly about a little bit over 100 FTEs, and 90% of our revenue comes out of the federal space. So we're very much a federal firm who has past performance in this market. Past performance in ECM and federal, but also past performance around Alfresco and a proven solution. And so, again, just reasons why Art and the team decided to kind of engage with Armedia and Alfresco. And then I think the key personnel, and Demi is the architect for the project, so he can definitely speak a lot more about the technology and what they're doing. And then Balaji Rajamoniover was the PM. And then from a Alfresco perspective, there's reach back into the platform, right? So any engagement that you go into, there may be some hiccups here and there. So the ability to kind of escalate some of those issues, get it into engineering, factor those in, I think that's one. And then reviewing the architecture as we look to scale it out, having the vendor kind of look at the architecture and give feedback into, yes, this is using the best practices, just from a thumbs up to make sure that Armedia is headed down the right path. Right? Just as a high-level ConOps for the project, again, MDUFA 3 is the kind of governing act that kind of defined this relationship between the medical device organization and the FDA CDRH. So basically you have a medical device company who's the applicant that does a submission with their medical device, and FDA has a panel that will define a panel, a group of folks, to evaluate that device to make sure that it is, good for use by humans. That goes into an application called DocMan. DocMan stands for Doc Manager, and DocMan is actually built on top of the Alfresco platform. And then there's constant communication between the medical device companies, the evaluators that are reviewing the product, and that main point of communication is through email. And so one of the integrations that we're going to actually show, that Demi will show, is the integration of the email. So basically, by carbon copying an email address, that email thread automatically goes into the repository in the appropriate case. All right. So with that, actually, let me transition it to Demi, where he can come up and do the demo.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, James. So, James, appreciate you setting the stage for us. What I'd like to do, if you remember earlier, James mentioned 5 different objectives that the FDA, the CDRH part of the FDA has. And I'd like to focus on the 4th objective, which is the interactive review process. So basically what you have is you have the industry, they want to have one of their medical devices approved. So what they do, they submit a submission. So before we introduced Alfresco, what would happen is when they submitted that submission, the medical device company doesn't quite know or isn't aware of what happens. So the submission gets in, but maybe 3 weeks passes by, 4 weeks, and they're just not quite sure of what's happening. So Congress passed this law, as James mentioned, MDUFA 3, that says, hey, FDA, we want you to be more transparent so we can see what's happening. So if you remember, Beth spoke about being transparent, being collaborative and participatory. And so what we've done there is we sort of changed the process a little bit. So now let's take a look at the screen. So now if a medical device company submits one of these types of submissions, either a PMA or a 510K, what happens next is that FDA receives the request and they process it, and then they assign a lead reviewer to that submission. And once that's done, Alfresco gets notified of that lead reviewer, or that submission is now ready to go. And what we do from an Alfresco perspective is we automatically create a taxonomy structure based on the metadata or the type of submission it is. So if it's a 510K, we then create a different folder structure. We then automatically assign email addresses. So what the industry members can now do, they can automatically send an email to FDA, and FDA can then reply, but then Alfresco stores all of those emails and all of those communications. And at the end of the quarter or whatever, FDA can then run reports and prove how they have been transparent, right? They can say, hey, we've communicated with this company over 100 times, this company over this many times, and you don't just say we're transparent, but you actually prove it. And in fact, the industry is willing to pay, as James mentioned, over $600 million and really for this transparency. So it's pretty valuable to them. And another thing that happens is once the request gets into Alfresco, the lead reviewer can now work with, in a collaboratory fashion, other mathematicians, chemists, statisticians, and what they do is they do their thing. They go review whether or not that device is safe. They store all of their project information into Alfresco, and after that, it goes through workflows. It goes through just a long list of steps, and if the device is approved, then it goes to the next step. And also, I'd like to just emphasize this dynamic security, and that's really, really cool. At least I thought it was cool, and I think FDA thinks it's cool as well, where for a particular submission, because this is one of the issues they were having, you need to really just control security. While openness is great, but you want to be open to the people who you want to be open to and not the world. And so you can automatically upgrade someone's permissions or downgrade their permissions, and business users can do that. And once that happens, so once the submission is in Alfresco, ready to go, email is configured, now FDA employees or the lead reviewer can now communicate back and forth with the device company, and Alfresco will then capture all of that email communication, which is huge. And again, I remember at the end, we report against it. And that's what Congress wants, right? Those are the performance metrics that they're looking for so that you can justify the money that the industry spent. All right, so now let's go ahead and just take a look at the demo. And what I'll show you, remember there's several objectives, but I'll just take a look at one particular objective, and this is the interactive review process. How many of you have seen the Alfresco share interface before? Just by a show of hands. All right, cool. Some of you haven't. So what I'll do is just quickly just explain that. So this is an out-of-the-box share interface that you see on screen. And so you see here you have your document library, and essentially what this is a folder structure. Just think of a file cabinet with folders and files, right? But it's a digital version of it. So what I'd like to do is, let's say that I'm a medical device company. I submitted, I paid my fees to the FDA, and I want to get my device approved. However, 3 weeks passed by, and I haven't heard anything. In the past, there was nothing really I could do but wait. But now, we can be more transparent with only a subset of people, so not the world, but to that medical device company only, and that medical device agent can send an email directly to FDA saying, hey, give me a status update on my particular submission. Okay? And once they send that email, several things kick off. Your lead reviewer gets emailed, and in addition, Alfresco receives that email. And Alfresco remains your system of record. And remember that when a device company sends these emails, there can be proprietary information in those emails. So we encrypt and decrypt those emails, and throughout its entire transit path, and it gets stored in Alfresco in a secure fashion, and that's pretty huge. So now what I'll do So I'll search Alfresco in a Google-like fashion. So Alfresco has a Google-like search engine built right inside. And so now business users can, without having to navigate per se, but they can just easily search for a submission. Did I enter the wrong one? I may have. Yeah, I entered the wrong submission ID. But this should be it here. What did I just do? I think I sent it to the wrong one. Wow. All right, well, just hang tight. So all right. Here, there we go. Okay, so we can go ahead and send a submission here. And we'll wait for Alfresco to receive that email and also process that email. Double check that it came in successfully. All right, so if you notice now, Alfresco stored that email and it's within the system, and it's also a system of record. And so now that lead reviewer can reply back to that email, and all of that communication is then captured. And so at the very end, what we do is report on it. We then can communicate back. We can let Congress know, hey, this is how we've improved our transparency, and that's pretty cool. So I would say that's about it. I can turn it back over to James. And thank you all.
So I think one of the big questions is when industry comes along and they're asking the question, hey, I've had my device in the process for 60, 80 days. I've called multiple times. I've sent emails. Historically, maybe not those emails weren't there, but now we always have those emails stored in the repository. So if the email was actually sent, it should be in the repository, and we can go back and we can find it. As well as FDA can prove that they've also sent those emails, right, and responded to the applicant. And so by having this system in place, you now have a system of record to kind of go back and justify that, or at least to prove that the communication has been going on and there hadn't been gaps. So keys to success, right? So we try to keep this somewhat on the business flavor and kind of looking at it from a FDA perspective. But keys to success, the delivery team. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of projects come down to the people, processes, and technology, right? And so ultimately, we're starting out with having a strong team that can come in and deliver. And I know this could be somewhat self-serving, right, since we're the strong team, but ultimately, you got to have a strong team, right? Stakeholder involvement. One of the great things about this project, all the way through it, is that the business users were always engaged. We first kicked the project off, and you'll see at the end, we say demos throughout, but we came in and really tried to do an education with the business users of what can be done from a Alfresco perspective. And that way, they walk in kind of understanding what are some of the tools that they could use. They understand how their business process is. Well, let us help you understand what you can do with the tool, and then you help us kind of think through how best to kind of leverage the platform to meet your business process. So early on, we did demos. Throughout the process, we continue to do demos as we add more functionality into it. At times, there were things that they wanted to do that were pretty tough to do in the platform. So we had that discussion. Well, we can do it, but it's going to cost X, Y, to get this done. Is that really worth it? Or maybe we can do it this way. And so, again, involving the stakeholders one, kind of helps from an expectation perspective, but also kind of, I think, from a success perspective. Iterative roadmap. We didn't try to bite off everything in the first delivery of the project. Ultimately, what we did was say, let's kind of define what are some of the key functionality that you need to have in order to start using the platform early on. And then ultimately, let's get that done in the first phase, and then we'll roll out new functionality as based on the stakeholders, right? But ultimately, let's get something out the door versus trying to build this huge system. Plan for hiccups, right? Armedia is developing the application. They've outsourced the environment to a certain extent, the management of the FDA environment. There are other vendors in play throughout the process, and so you need to plan for. There's new technology being rolled into the enterprise, right? So you need to plan for going through whatever kind of CCB boards that need to be taken care of. You need to plan for these types of things to happen. You need, it's very easy if you can have control of everything to just say, okay, cool, we've gone through our testing environment, we've gone through UAT, now we need to go into production. Well, if it's being managed by another vendor, they may have 20 other people that they're also responding to. So you somewhat need to plan for, what kind of SLAs they have in order to make updates into your environment. And then once you get in there, making sure you really kind of thought through all the steps in order to get things kind of installed, right? There's a lot of things you just kind of do natively, but if you don't have them kind of documented and someone else is doing the install, they may not do those things. So again, just kind of plan for hiccups. And then I mentioned demos throughout. Can't really reiterate that. Continue to do demos, continue to keep the stakeholders engaged, allow them to kind of get buy-in while you're doing the project, and continue to kind of inform what they thought they wanted from a requirements and shall statements into what they really were looking for as they kind of got into the application. All right, so with that, I guess I'll open it up for questions. Sure.
Like many things in the world, there's a lot of convergence going on in medical devices. So a stent is a device. A medical drug-coated stent has a drug aspect to it. Do you see any opportunities for follow-on either sharing of the metadata or some of the other information in the submission with other agencies in the FDA?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm gonna say you and Art need to meet up after this to kind of discuss it. I think from a technology perspective, a lot of this stuff isn't hard to do from a technology perspective. So if you want me to answer from a technology perspective, yes. From a policy perspective, I'm not quite sure what the policies are there, right? And what information can be shared at what point from a medical device, because some of these devices still hadn't really hit the market yet, right? We're still kind of evaluating. So you still have a lot of sensitivity around the intellectual property of these devices and who has access. So again, from a technology, yes. From a policy and agency, departmental, I'm not quite sure.
Two questions, if I might. You've gotten through this whole thing without saying 21 CFR Part 11B. Are you compliant in that respect?
I think all these tough questions, man, wow. I'm not sure.
Okay. And how long have you been working with Alfresco?
So we've been, as a partner, working with Alfresco for, I guess, about 5 years.
Since version?
Version, oh man, 2? 1.2?
And how has it changed since then?
Besides features and stability and a bunch of the scale, and it's changed a lot, right? I mean, I would say not even going back to the 1.2 version, the 3 version, right, until the 4, the platform has changed. Moving away from the Lucene to Solar, some of the metadata being in in the database versus searching against the index. There's so many things they've done from a performance perspective in the last version, I think is there. I think from a usability perspective, the product is definitely improved there. From a features, I mean, 1.2 wasn't DoD 5015.2 certified, so they've gone on to get a RM product that's certified. So I think even from moving from JBPM as a workflow engine into activity, I think they've improved the workflow engine. So there's a lot of investments in the platform. It is definitely improving. But I think as we kind of, better yet, another question may be, how does Alfresco stack up to other platforms, right, that are on the market? And I think that, I think what you look at, do the 80-20 rule, I think 80% of the functionality that you're looking for, you can find in Alfresco. And I think most of the problems that we're trying to solve, you can get done in Alfresco, right? If you start looking at, well, do you have some of these other things like rights management? Well, maybe not. But I'll ask you guys, how many customers out there are looking to really kind of do digital rights management? And when I say rights, so maybe I need to explain what is information rights management to a certain extent. And so information rights management allows you to protect the content outside of your, not just outside of your organization, but ultimately, if I send a Word document or a PDF document out to the customer base, I can lock that file down. And I can say, even though you're outside of my firewall and outside of my organization, I can define whether or not you can print the document, right? And I can even expire that content and say, it's outside the firewall, I want to expire it, so even though you open it up now, tomorrow you might not be able to open that content up. So it allows you to just kind of extend the security model outside the organization. So natively, you don't get that from the Alfresco, but we can integrate other tools to bring that to the market, right? Partner tools to bring it to the market. So I think, from a use case perspective, I look at how many ECM platforms that we go down or ECM RFPs that we respond to. That's probably in the 5th percentile that we see that type of requirement in it. So Alfresco has changed, the software and the platform has definitely matured. The scalability as a SI, kind of walking into like an OPM, we're talking about 40 terabytes, 600 million pages. If you would have asked me, do I feel comfortable doing that with the 2.0 version? I probably would have said no, right? 9 times out of 10, I would have said, let's go with some of these other platforms. But we feel very comfortable now saying, yes, we can do that with the Alfresco platform.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to know how long this FDA project took. What was the total timeline? In the sense, how years or?
Sure. The first phase wasn't quite years, but maybe I should bill Art for years. We started the project, roughly it was about 6 months, right? 6 months from coming in, doing a proof of concept, and then ultimately into getting an application into production.
Oh, in 6 months, the whole application went into production?
Yes, in 6
That
months.
was nice. And
I need to give you my business card. Hold on. No,
that's fine. I am already working with Alfresco. So other question I had, one thing was I noticed in the presentation that said that the business owner had control of the taxonomy and templates. How much control? Because what I understand is that content model development is in a way sort of waterfall, so it's not very easy to change content model iteratively. You kind of define your base content model and then, so how much of the control you can give to the business owners? And I don't know if it is a technical question, how?
Sure. Yeah, okay. They just vetoed me.
No problem. Well, so what we managed to do, although Alfresco's content model itself, how you define data within Alfresco is it's via like an XML file. What we've sort of abstracted that away, and we used Alfresco's data list capabilities, and then we use folder structures to say, hey, here's a template folder structure, and at time of creating that submission, we look at that folder structure and we make a copy of that template, And so business users can change that template however they choose. And from a metadata perspective, we use the data list. It's a data list feature Alfresco has, and that drives the metadata that we have. And so that's how we've sort of managed to get around that limitation. But business users do, in fact, have full access, and they can change the taxonomy or the folder structures. You're very welcome.
Hey, first of all, I want to thank both you, James, and Demi. This has been awesome.